If the most popular girl in school starts waiting outside your classroom every single day, don't assume you're the luckiest guy alive, because sometimes the person chasing you is carrying a secret you've already forgotten. My name is Ethan Carter, and for the past week I had been treating the east hallway of Brookside High like it was a disaster zone. Most students picked the shortest route between classes. I had developed at least 6 different escape paths that involved stairwells, the library entrance, the music wing, and once, embarrassingly, the janitor's hallway after pretending I had dropped my calculator. It wasn't because I hated Sophia Bennett. That would have been easier to explain. Everyone knew Sophia. She was the kind of girl teachers trusted, students admired, and yearbook photographers somehow managed to find every single time they needed a cover photo. She smiled at everyone. She volunteered at charity drives. She somehow looked perfectly put together even during first period on a rainy Monday. Meanwhile, I considered it a personal victory if my hoodie didn't come out of the dryer looking like it had lost a fight with a blanket. The strange part was that Sophia had never spoken more than a handful of words to me before last Tuesday. Then something changed. Or maybe it hadn't changed at all. Maybe I had simply noticed too late. It started with a glance across the cafeteria. Then another outside chemistry. Then she waved. I pretended to be deeply interested in the vending machine. The next day she called my name across the courtyard. I suddenly remembered I had absolutely nowhere important to be and walked in the opposite direction anyway. My best friend, Mason, nearly laughed himself sick. "Dude," he said between bites of pizza, "people spend 4 years hoping Sophia Bennett notices them. You're acting like she's collecting overdue parking tickets." I shrugged without looking up from my lunch. "Maybe she's looking for somebody else." Mason snorted. "She literally said, 'Ethan, wait.'" "Common name," I answered. "Not really." "Close enough." He stared at me for a long second before shaking his head. "You're weird." "Fair enough. I probably was." The truth was harder to explain because it didn't make much sense, even inside my own head. Every time Sophia looked at me, I got the uncomfortable feeling that she expected something I couldn't give her. Not homework. Not a favor. Recognition. Like she was waiting for me to remember a conversation we had never had. Or at least one I couldn't remember having. That feeling only grew stronger on Friday morning. I stepped out of U.S. history, adjusting the strap of my backpack, already planning which hallway would give me the best chance of avoiding another awkward encounter. Then the classroom door opened, and the chatter around me suddenly softened into curious whispers. I looked up. Sophia Bennett was standing against the wall directly across from my classroom door. She wasn't scrolling through her phone. She wasn't talking to friends. She wasn't even pretending to wait for someone else. She was looking straight at me with a small, nervous smile that somehow made the busiest hallway in school feel completely still. Then she lifted one hand in a tiny wave and quietly said, "Hi, Ethan. I've been waiting for you." For exactly 3 seconds, neither of us moved. The hallway kept buzzing around us with lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking across polished floors, and conversations bouncing off the walls, but it all sounded strangely far away. Sophia lowered her hand first, her smile fading into something uncertain. "Do you have a minute?" she asked softly. My brain immediately suggested about 12 different escape routes. Unfortunately, all of them required teleportation. "Actually," I said, adjusting my backpack even though it did not need adjusting, "I kind of have somewhere to be." She glanced at the classroom behind me where students were still filing out. "Your next class is not for another 20 minutes. Well. There went excuse number 1. Mason chose that exact moment to walk past us carrying a stack of notebooks. He looked from me to Sophia, then back to me with the kind of grin that belonged on someone about to witness a spectacular train wreck. "I suddenly remembered I have something important to do," he announced dramatically. "Good luck, buddy." "You do not have anything to do," I called after him. "You literally have lunch." Exactly, he replied without turning around. I am protecting my peace. Traitor. Sophia let out a quiet laugh, and for just a second she looked less like the most recognizable girl in school and more like an ordinary student trying not to feel awkward. I promise I am not trying to make your life difficult, she said. It kind of feels like you are, I admitted before I could stop myself. Her expression fell. Not dramatically. Just enough that I immediately felt guilty. She nodded once. That is fair. We stood there in another uncomfortable silence until a group of sophomores walked by, whispering loud enough for both of us to hear. See? I told you she likes him. No way. Ethan does not even have social media. Maybe that is why. Wonderful. Exactly what every quiet person dreams about. Becoming hallway entertainment. I rubbed the back of my neck. People are starting to notice. I know. They are talking. I know. This is getting weird. I know, she repeated, looking down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. That is why I wanted to explain. Before she could continue, the warning bell rang through the building. Students immediately surged into motion, flowing through the hallway like a river breaking loose after a dam opened. Someone accidentally bumped my shoulder. Another student squeezed between us with an apology. When the crowd settled, Sophia had taken one small step back. After school, she asked. Just 10 minutes. Please. I hesitated long enough that she gave me an understanding smile, although it looked more tired than hopeful. If you decide not to come, I will understand. Then she turned and disappeared into the moving crowd before I could answer. I stared after her until she was completely gone. You are officially the biggest mystery in this school, a voice said beside me. I nearly jumped. It was Mrs. Reynolds, my history teacher, carrying a box of graded essays. She smiled knowingly. Everything all right, Ethan? Yes, ma'am, I answered a little too quickly. She nodded and continued down the hallway. I started walking toward my next class, but something kept bothering me. It was not the rumors. It was not the attention. It was the look on Sophia's face when she said she wanted to explain. It was the strange certainty in her eyes, like she had been carrying the same conversation around for years while I had no memory of ever starting it. I spent the entire last period pretending to pay attention while my mind replayed the same question over and over again. Should I meet Sophia after school, or should I keep pretending none of this was happening? By the time the final bell rang, I still had not decided. Students poured into the hallways with the familiar Friday energy, laughing about weekend plans and rushing toward the parking lot. I took the long route toward the west exit, convincing myself I was simply avoiding the crowd. That was only half true. The other half was standing somewhere outside waiting for me. Or at least I assumed she was. I kept my head down as I pushed through the front doors. Warm afternoon sunlight spilled across the sidewalk, and the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass from the football field. I scanned the student parking lot first. Nothing. Then the bus loop. Still nothing. Maybe she had given up. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Relief should have come first. Instead, I felt oddly disappointed. Looking for somebody. Mason's voice drifted beside me. I nearly dropped my water bottle. You need to stop sneaking up on people. He grinned. You need to stop acting like the main character in a mystery movie. I am not looking for anyone. He slowly turned his head toward the front gate without saying a word. Naturally, I followed his gaze. There she was. Sophia stood beneath a large maple tree just beyond the school entrance. She was alone, holding the strap of her backpack with both hands instead of scrolling through her phone like everyone else. Every few seconds she glanced toward the building, then looked away again. She was waiting. Mason let out a quiet whistle. She has been there at least 15 minutes. How do you know? Because I noticed before you did. I sighed. This is becoming a problem. No, Mason corrected. Ignoring it is becoming the problem. Before I could answer, Sophia spotted us. Her face brightened just enough that I could tell she had almost convinced herself I was not coming. She walked over at an unhurried pace, giving me every chance to leave if I wanted to. Somehow that made it harder to run away. Hi, she said with the same gentle smile. Thank you for staying. I almost did not. She nodded. I figured. Mason looked between us before taking one dramatic step backward. I suddenly remembered my mom asked me to pick up milk. I frowned. You do not even have your driver's license. Details. He pointed at me. Do not make me regret believing in romance. Nothing romantic is happening, I called after him. He only waved without turning around. Sophia laughed quietly again, but this time it faded almost immediately. She looked down at the concrete for a second before taking a slow breath. I know this has been confusing, she said. Probably uncomfortable too. That is one way to describe it. She accepted the comment with a small nod. I never wanted to embarrass you. There was something different about her voice now. The confidence everyone associated with Sophia Bennett had softened into hesitation. It felt like she had rehearsed this conversation 100 times but still could not find the right words. She looked up at me with an expression that carried far more hope than certainty. I just needed to know one thing, she said quietly. Do you really not remember me at all? For a moment I honestly thought she had mistaken me for someone else. I searched her face for any sign that this was some elaborate joke, some hidden camera prank that would end with half the senior class laughing from behind the bushes. There was nothing. Sophia simply waited. Her eyes never left mine, patient but anxious in a way I had never seen before. I let out a slow breath. I am sorry, I admitted. I feel like I should know what you are talking about, but I do not. She nodded once, almost as if she had expected that answer all along. Thank you for being honest. That response caught me off guard. Most people would have looked disappointed. Sophia somehow looked relieved. You really do not. Remember, she whispered more to herself than to me. Remember what? I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. Not here. I glanced around. Students were still crossing the parking lot, climbing into cars, laughing with friends, and every few seconds someone looked in our direction before pretending they had not. It was impossible to tell whether they were curious or simply bored. Either way, I suddenly understood why Sophia had seemed uncomfortable despite being the most recognizable person in school. She hated having this conversation in front of an audience just as much as I did. There is a coffee shop about 2 blocks from here, she said quietly. Tomorrow morning, maybe. If you are willing. I hesitated. My instinct still told me to keep walking, go home, play video games, and pretend my life had not become unusually complicated in the span of 4 days. But another feeling had started pushing back against that instinct. Curiosity. It had been growing ever since she first called my name in the hallway. I will think about it, I answered. Instead of looking frustrated, Sophia smiled gently. That is enough. She started to turn away, then suddenly stopped. Ethan? Yeah. Do you still draw? The question landed so unexpectedly that I blinked twice. Draw. Sketching. You used to carry a little notebook everywhere. I frowned. I have never carried a sketchbook to high school. No, she said softly. Not high school. Before I could ask another question, she offered a small wave and walked toward the student parking lot. I watched her disappear between rows of cars until she was completely out of sight. The breeze rustled the leaves above me, and for reasons I could not explain, the word sketchbook echoed inside my head. It felt strangely familiar, like hearing a song you had not listened to in years without remembering where you first learned it. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Mason. "Well? Are you secretly engaged now, or do I still have time to make fun of you?" I laughed despite myself and typed back. "Neither." I just became even more confused. His reply came almost instantly. "Congratulations." That is usually how interesting stories begin. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket and started the walk home, I could not shake the feeling that Sophia had not been trying to change my future at all. She had been trying to hand me back a piece of my past that I did not even know was missing. Saturday morning arrived with far more questions than answers. I told myself I was only going to the coffee shop because I wanted to end the mystery once and for all. That explanation sounded perfectly reasonable until I realized I had spent almost 10 minutes deciding which sweatshirt looked the least like I had actually tried. By the time I reached Maple Street Cafe, the little bell above the front door chimed softly, carrying with it the warm smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon pastries. Sophia was already there, sitting by the window with 2 paper cups on the table. She stood as soon as she saw me, looking both relieved and nervous at the same time. "I was not sure you would come," she admitted. "Honestly, neither was I," I replied. That earned the smallest laugh from her, and somehow the room felt less tense. I sat across from her, wrapping my hands around the warm cup she gently slid toward me. "Hot chocolate," she said. "You never liked coffee." I stared at the drink for a second before looking back at her. "Another lucky guess?" She shook her head slowly. "No." Silence settled between us, but unlike the awkward pauses at school, this one felt patient. Outside, people walked along the sidewalk carrying shopping bags while a golden retriever happily dragged its owner toward the park across the street. The ordinary Saturday morning somehow made the conversation feel even stranger. Finally, Sophia reached into her backpack and carefully placed a small blue notebook on the table. The edges were worn, and several colorful sticky notes peeked out from the pages. She rested one hand on the cover without opening it. "Do you remember moving away during 6th grade?" she asked. "Yes," I answered immediately. "My dad got transferred for work. We lived in Ohio before coming back here 2 years ago." She nodded. "Then at least we have the same starting point." She took a slow breath before continuing. "We were classmates for almost an entire school year." I searched my memory. Different classrooms, different faces, different teachers drifted through my thoughts like old photographs left out in the rain. Nothing became clear. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "I still cannot picture it." Instead of looking hurt, Sophia gently pushed the notebook toward me. "I thought that might happen." I hesitated before opening the cover. On the first page, written in slightly uneven handwriting that clearly belonged to a much younger child, were the words, "Best ideas ever." Below the title were little pencil sketches of comic book heroes, cartoon animals, rockets, and goofy stick figures with oversized smiles. They were simple drawings, but one detail made my heart skip. In the bottom right corner of every page was the same tiny shooting star. I knew that star. I had doodled it on homework assignments, birthday cards, even the margins of my math worksheets when I was little. I had completely forgotten about it until that exact moment. My fingers froze against the paper. Sophia watched my expression carefully but said nothing. "This," I whispered. "I drew this star all the time." Her eyes shimmered with quiet hope. "You drew it because you said every story deserved one small thing that reminded people to keep looking up." I looked at her, completely speechless. Then, for the first time since all of this had begun, a faint image flickered somewhere in the back of my mind. A classroom. Sunlight through tall windows. A girl sitting beside me, smiling as I handed her a pencil with a tiny silver shooting star sticker wrapped around the middle. The memory disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind only a feeling instead of a complete picture. I blinked several times, staring at the tiny silver shooting star in the corner of the page. I remember the sticker, I whispered. Not everything. Just, the sticker. Sophia smiled, and it was the first smile I had seen from her that reached her eyes without hesitation. That is more than yesterday. I slowly turned another page. Every few sheets held another drawing, another joke, another list of impossible inventions that only two 11-year-olds could have believed would change the world. A backpack that could finish homework by itself. A treehouse connected by zip lines. A dog that could understand sarcasm. I actually laughed. These ideas are terrible. They were brilliant at the time, Sophia protested with a playful grin. We were visionaries. We were definitely something. She watched me carefully, almost afraid to interrupt the tiny pieces of memory trying to reconnect. You always filled the margins with little stars, she said. Whenever I got frustrated because my drawings looked messy, you would point at one of them and say nobody notices mistakes if you give them something hopeful to look at instead. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the strange warmth spreading through my chest. None of this felt completely familiar, but none of it felt impossible either. It was like looking through a fogged window and slowly recognizing the outline of a place you had once called home. What happened after that? I asked quietly. Sophia looked down at the notebook before answering. Your father accepted the transfer during spring semester. I nodded. I remember moving. You told everyone goodbye on the last Friday before break. She paused for a second, taking a careful breath. You told me we would stay friends forever. I looked away toward the cafe window. Families walked along the sidewalk while children chased pigeons across the town square. Everything outside looked wonderfully ordinary, which somehow made the conversation feel even more emotional. Did we write letters? I asked. Sophia gave a small shake of her head. For a little while. She reached into the back pocket of the notebook and carefully removed several folded envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Then they stopped. My stomach tightened. Because of me? Probably because we were children, she answered gently. Life changes quickly when you are 11. She handed me the bundle. My own handwriting covered the first envelope. Seeing it felt strangely unreal, as though another version of myself had reached across the years to say hello. I kept every single one, Sophia admitted. Even after they stopped coming. I looked at her in disbelief. For all these years? She nodded. I always hoped we would meet again someday. I could not find the right words. I had spent the past week convinced that Sophia Bennett was chasing me for reasons I could not understand. Now I realized she had simply been carrying a friendship that I had accidentally left behind years ago. She had remembered every conversation, every sketch, every promise, while my memories had quietly faded somewhere between moving trucks, new schools, and growing up. The realization settled over me with equal parts gratitude and guilt. I looked back at the notebook resting between us and softly said, I think I owe you more than an apology. I think I owe you the years I forgot. My words hung between us for several seconds. Sophia looked at me with an expression that was almost impossible to describe. She was happy, but not because I had remembered everything. She was happy because I had finally stopped pretending there was nothing worth remembering. She gently shook her head. You do not owe me anything, Ethan. I disappeared. You moved. I forgot. She smiled sadly. You grew up. I looked down at the stack of letters resting beside the notebook. That still feels unfair. Maybe, she admitted. But I never blamed you. That answer somehow made me feel even worse. I laughed quietly, rubbing my forehead. You know, all week I convinced myself you were trying to ruin my peaceful life. Sophia covered her face with one hand, laughing for the first time without holding back. I noticed. I changed hallways. I noticed that too. I even hid behind the music department one day." Her eyes widened in amused disbelief. "That was you?" "Unfortunately." She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her hot chocolate, and before long I was laughing with her. The strange tension that had followed us since the hallway outside history class slowly melted away. It felt surprisingly natural, like picking up a conversation that had only been paused instead of abandoned for years. When our laughter settled, Sophia grew quieter. Again. She traced one finger along the edge of the notebook before speaking. "Can I tell you something I never told anyone else?" I nodded. "After you moved away, I stopped drawing for almost a year. That caught me completely off guard." "Why?" She looked toward the cafe window, watching sunlight dance across the parked cars outside. "Because drawing reminded me of you." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "Everyone thought I became confident because I joined clubs, made new friends, and started saying yes to everything." She smiled faintly. "The truth is I was terrified of being forgotten again." Something inside my chest tightened. Suddenly the past week made perfect sense. The waiting outside my classroom. The patient smiles. The refusal to give up after I kept avoiding her. She had not been chasing popularity or attention. She had been protecting a promise that only one of us still remembered. "When I saw your name on the new student list this year," she continued softly, "I thought you would recognize me immediately." She laughed at herself. "I even practiced what I was going to say." "Really?" "About 30 different versions." "Which one was your favorite?" She smiled. "Probably, 'Hey, it has been forever.' That sounds normal." Instead I got. She straightened her shoulders and playfully imitated my awkward expression. "Sorry, I have somewhere to be." I groaned, covering my face with both hands. "Please do not ever imitate me again." "Why?" "Because apparently I look like a frightened squirrel." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "A polite squirrel." I laughed again, shaking my head. "That is somehow worse." We sat there smiling at each other until neither of us felt the need to fill the silence anymore. It was comfortable now. Familiar in a way I could not fully explain. As I looked at the notebook one more time, another tiny fragment surfaced from somewhere deep in my memory. Two children sitting under a giant oak tree during recess, arguing about which superhero would lose a race to a turtle. I could not hear every word, but I remembered the laughter. And for the first time, I did not feel like I was borrowing someone else's memories. They finally felt like mine. By the time we stepped outside, the afternoon sun had drifted lower, washing Maple Street in warm shades of gold. The sidewalk was busy with families, cyclists, and people enjoying the weekend, but somehow everything felt quieter than when I had walked into the cafe. Sophia tucked the blue notebook carefully back into her backpack, and for a moment neither of us seemed eager to head home. We started walking without deciding on a direction, matching each other's pace naturally. "You know," I said after a minute, "I think I finally understand why you kept waiting outside my classroom." She looked over with a curious smile. "Why?" "Because if our roles had been reversed, I probably would have done the same thing." She laughed softly. Eventually. Eventually. After hiding behind several school hallways. That part was probably unavoidable. She shook her head, pretending to be disappointed. "You really were difficult." "I still am. Maybe a little less now." We crossed the street as the pedestrian signal flashed white. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from the bakery on the corner, and somewhere nearby a little girl was trying to convince her father that one more scoop of ice cream was a perfectly reasonable lunch. I smiled without thinking. "What?" Sophia asked. "Nothing. I just remembered something else." She stopped walking immediately. "Really?" I nodded slowly. "Not a big memory. Just, you always traded your chocolate pudding for my apple slices at lunch." Her eyes widened before she laughed in disbelief. Because you hated apples. I still do. And I still love chocolate pudding. We both laughed, and another tiny piece of the past quietly slipped back into place. It was strange how memories returned. Not all at once like opening a photo album, but one small detail at a time, connected by ordinary moments that had once seemed too unimportant to remember. We reached the small park near the town square and sat on an empty bench overlooking a duck pond. Children chased bubbles across the grass while an elderly couple shared a newspaper nearby. It felt like the kind of afternoon that asked nothing from anyone. Except to slow down. Sophia rested her hands in her lap and looked out over the water. Can I tell you one more secret? She asked. You have earned at least 100 by now. She smiled. When you came back to Brookside this year, everyone already knew who I was. They kept telling me I could introduce myself to anyone and they would probably say yes to hanging out. She looked down with a shy laugh. But I was terrified to walk over to you. Why? Because I thought if you looked at me with a blank expression. She paused before finishing quietly. Then maybe the friendship only mattered to me. I turned toward her. It mattered to me too. Even if you forgot. Forgetting is not the same as not caring. She looked at me for a long second, searching my face as if deciding whether to believe those words. Then she smiled, smaller than before but somehow more genuine. Thank you. I smiled back. No. Thank you for refusing to give up on someone who did not even realize he was lost. We sat together in comfortable silence as the sunlight shimmered across the pond, and for the first time since returning to Brookside, I stopped feeling like I had come back to a familiar town. Instead, it finally felt like I had found my way back to someone who had quietly been waiting for me all along. Monday morning felt different before I even stepped onto campus. The buildings were the same. The bell rang at exactly the same time. Students hurried through the front entrance carrying backpacks and half-finished breakfasts just like every other day. Nothing around me had changed. I had. For the first time since returning to Brookside High, I was not studying every hallway like an escape map. I was not calculating alternate routes or wondering how to disappear into the crowd. Instead, I arrived 10 minutes early and walked straight toward the history wing. I leaned against the wall outside my classroom and waited. 2 freshmen walked by and glanced at me with puzzled expressions. One of them whispered something that made the other laugh. I almost smiled. A week ago I would have hidden in the library to avoid this exact situation. Now I simply checked the time on my phone. And kept waiting. A few minutes later, I saw Sophia turn the corner at the far end of the hallway. She was talking with 2 classmates until she looked up and noticed me. She stopped walking so suddenly that her friends nearly bumped into her. They followed her surprised expression before quietly excusing themselves and continuing toward class. Sophia stood there for a second as if she was not entirely sure what she was seeing. Then she walked toward me with the same careful pace she had used outside my classroom all week, except this time there was no uncertainty in her eyes. You are early, she said. I know. Waiting for someone? I nodded. Yeah. She glanced behind herself. Who? I smiled. A girl who spent an entire week proving that I am much slower than she is. She laughed, covering her face for a second before looking back at me. That was a terrible answer. I spent all weekend thinking of something clever. And that was the winner. Unfortunately. She shook her head, still smiling. You definitely forgot how to be smooth. I am not sure I ever knew. We both laughed, and somehow the hallway that had once felt like the most uncomfortable place in school now felt completely ordinary. Students continued walking past us, lockers opened and closed, teachers greeted their classes, and the morning carried on exactly as it always had. The difference was that I no longer cared who noticed us talking. Mason rounded the corner carrying a breakfast sandwich and nearly froze when he saw us. He stared dramatically before pointing at me. Hold on. You are the one waiting now. Looks that way, I answered. He slowly nodded with exaggerated seriousness. Character development. I respect it. Sophia laughed while I rolled my eyes. You have been waiting all week to say that, have not you? Absolutely. He walked away looking far too pleased with himself. Sophia turned back toward me. So, what happens now? I looked at the classroom door behind us before answering. I think we stop trying to get back the years we missed. She tilted her head. What do we do instead? We make sure we do not lose any more. Her smile was small, warm, and wonderfully familiar. The first bell echoed through the hallway, and together we walked into class side by side. As I slipped into my seat, another memory quietly surfaced without any effort at all. Two children sitting beneath an old oak tree, drawing tiny shooting stars in the corners of every page because one of them believed every story deserved a hopeful ending. Back then, I thought we were only decorating notebooks. Years later, I finally realized we had been leaving ourselves a way to find each other again.